Okay, we're going to start with an introduction of what media literacy is and thank some of our partners and everything, so that'll give some time for people to trickle in should they desire. So on behalf of the Graduate Program in Developmental Education and the National Association for Media Literacy Education, I welcome you to the first ever Media Literacy Week in the United States. Canada is celebrating their 10-year anniversary. In the US, we get to celebrate our 1-year anniversary.
We'll catch up.
Thank you, thank you. I wanted to thank a couple of people before we get started, specifically Michelle and Alicia, who aren't here, but we'll see this later, from the National Association for Media Literacy Education. Emily Miller-Payne, our graduate programs director, and Blake Powers, who's sitting right there in the gray button-up shirt. The San Marcos Library, the two Debs, Deb Tomaselli and Deborah Carter, have been extremely helpful. SHN Sports, we have Carl over here from SHN Sports. Should you ever need any podcasting or streaming services, there's your guy. And then all of our panelists and the various organizations they represent, Chris from NAC, and Elliot we have from Travel Tuba and Cultural Transformations, and Heath Allen is an actor and musician, and we have the co-founders of the ATX Festival, Emily and Caitlin. I will actually let them introduce themselves in a moment, so more on that to come. I wanted to define media literacy. When we wanted to start this event, we had to go around and ask some people for permission to use spaces and equipment and various whatnot. So during that process, I discovered that media literacy is kind of a vague term, and it would be helpful to start by defining it. The national organization, namely, defines media literacy as the ability to access, analyze, evaluate, and communicate about and through media. And that encompasses a lot. That's posting and tweeting in the creation area. That's consuming in terms of your analysis and your evaluation, being computer savvy and mobile device savvy and being able to access media in the first place. So the National Association for Media Literacy Education, which I will hereafter call namely, has actually been doing a lot of education in this area because not everybody comes with the same amount of intuitive knowledge in all of the different areas. So that's what we're here for. Just to give you a little bit of background from some media industry experts, I thought I'd pull in a couple of quotes. Joseph Gordon-Levitt, if you are not familiar, is the creator, director, etc. of a television show called Hit Record. And it's kind of a cool thing. Everybody comes together from all across the world and sends in digital content and comments on people's digital content and collaborates on digital content, and they create each episode of the TV show based on a specific theme. And Hit Record and Joe actually just won an award from Namely this year for their really exciting work, which is awesome. So in Joe's words, I think that it's worth recognizing that the media that we all choose to consume, that actually does make a difference. That is us participating in a larger cultural conversation. You know, I think we all sometimes like to think of whatever we watch as, it doesn't matter what I watch. It's all just harmless entertainment. And it's not entirely true, especially if you watch it repeatedly. I think that the stuff we watch does matter, and it does work its way into the way that we see the world. You may be familiar with this guy if you were a Star Wars fan, very timely. In George Lucas's own words, when people talk to me about the digital divide, I think of it not so much about who has access to what technology, as about who knows how to create and express themselves in the new language of the screen. If students aren't taught the language of sound and images, shouldn't they be considered as illiterate as if they left college without being able to read and write? So I brought these media industry experts to you on the screen as sort of a segue. The whole purpose of this event is to bring in media industry experts from our community to talk to us about larger issues, but also issues that are of import to us in our community. So without further ado, I will let each of these guys introduce themselves. First up, we have Chris Gonzalez, who's a social media marketer.
Hey, thank you. Appreciate the introduction. My name is Chris Gonzalez. I'm a lifelong entrepreneur, graduated from Texas State University, and really since then I've been really addicted to startups and social media. I've been in social media marketing for around the last 4 years, primarily working with a lot of small and medium businesses. And more recently, over the last year, I've been working on a new piece of technology called NAC. NAC is a social media advertising platform that connects individuals on social media to create what's called user-generated content. Then those people are actually paid for that content. So essentially, we pay people to take pictures of products and services and post it to their networks. We're really working on solving the problem of content creation, promotion, and distribution. And we really wanted to participate, and especially wanted to participate in today's panel today because I felt the advertising world is really changing, especially with the mainstream adoption of social media and the internet and how it's becoming more widely available, especially through mobile devices. And that's changing the way we're actually consuming advertisements and the way these advertisements are created. And I felt it's important to the public understand that this has a really impact on the commerce that we face today and the overall messages that we consume on these mainstream platforms. Thank you.
Do you want to take a second to define native advertising? Since
sure. Oh, sorry. Excuse me if I use some jargon in that definition, but native marketing and native advertising is essentially putting content in context for people. What's really been driving this change of advertising is the fact that for too long, advertisements have really been more about the brand and less about the actual consumer. Consumers have been interrupted with TV advertisements, spam in their email inbox. And more recently, like display advertisements. How many times have you been on a blog and actually want to like X out as soon as you get a display ad that pops up and you're trying to read it? And so it's really what those advertisements are non-native because they interrupt the experience that you're actually engaging with on that platform. So a television ad interrupts your television show. So that's why we've led to this growth of DVR and ad blockers now that we're seeing on mobile. And so what native advertising is a movement, it's actually about presenting advertisements in what's called in-feed or in context. So just like you would be scrolling on an Instagram feed and seeing pictures that your friends and families are actually posting, you might see a paid sponsored advertisement that's created by a brand, but it looks just like any other Instagram ad and doesn't really, or Instagram post, and doesn't really interrupt that experience using Instagram on the platform. Another way mainstream of native advertising that's been around is think about Coca-Cola sponsoring in a movie. Think about Fast and the Furious, for instance. You see Coca-Cola branding, but you're still learning the story, and you're not really, it's not really interrupting you. So native advertising's been around for a while, but with social media, it's really being brought out into a mainstream platform. So it's just presenting advertisements in context and in a non-disruptive experience way.
Elliot Stone is a social anthropologist, and he does a lot of really cool documentary work, but he also does some work that's closer to his heart that I'm hoping he'll talk about.
Sure. Do I need this microphone, or are you guys comfortable? Oh, okay. Thank you for having me here in San Marcos. I'm really glad to be here. Beautiful town. Are most of you from San Marcos? Well, for those of you that are, sorry about the recent floods. I know that was a difficult thing, and I hope you guys are recovering. I live in Austin, Texas now, and as Elizabeth pointed out, I was trained as a social anthropologist at the University of Texas in Austin between the years of 2009 and 2012. And my work in the Department of Social Anthropology took me to a republic in the south of Siberia called Tuva, where I pursued an interest that I'd held for many years in Tuva's unique music. While learning about Tuvan music, I was also conducting a study about post-Soviet politics and economics and fitting these musicians into the larger scheme of post-Soviet history. When working in Tuva, I also became an active musician, performing the music that Tuvans are known for. and was given several national awards and became very good friends with the current Tuvan Minister of Culture and Tourism. And he asked me to put together a tourism business for their republic that's public-facing, that essentially invites American audiences and European audiences to travel in Tuva, focusing on their cultural heritage and their immense natural beauty. And by natural beauty, I don't mean the Tuvans. I mean their natural environment. Not the Tuvans aren't beautiful, but we're not in that kind of business. When I came back from Tuva in 2013, I took up a full-time job at the Texas Historical Commission here in Austin, Texas, at the state capitol. And if, in case you're not familiar or the name doesn't say it all, the Texas Historical Commission is the state agency charged with the preservation of Texas's historic resources, particularly focusing on structures, though we also do work in the arena of oral history and community heritage development. In that position at the state, I've developed a mobile tour app for the state of Texas, and essentially the tour app contains 7 different curated tours, which will allow people who have downloaded the app to their devices to travel the state based on historic theme. So if you had an interest in, say, the Hispanic heritage of the state, or African American history in Texas, or the history of Texas's involvement in World War II, you could use any of these tours to take you to the places related to that particular historic theme, and then watch documentary shorts about the sites included to get a more robust understanding of the site, as told by the people who lived through those histories. So we, the Texas Historical Commission staff, are not the talking heads on camera. It's people who live in the community who tell you their history as they lived it. So a fairly forward-thinking product, and we're very proud of it. And that's why I'm here, is to discuss those 2 projects.
So maybe not right this second, but perhaps we might get a demonstration of some throat singing later?
I don't want to put that on you. No, I mean, if you're interested in some Tuvan singing later, sure, I'm glad to do it for you.
We have Heath Allen, an actor, a musician, a composer.
It's all true. I was raised by a mother who was in community theater, so I was kind of like being toted along to rehearsals as soon as I was born. Started out in theater, transitioned mostly more into like film and television and commercials now, but still try to get back to theater. Play in several bands, also do composition for film, TV, commercials, TV festivals. And it's a field that's, when she first told me about this, I was really, at first I was like, well, how do I fit in here? But then I realized it was like all the art we consume, whether it be TV, film, music, whatever, a lot of times, I think that's the whole point of this, is in a way, a lot of times we kind of consume mindlessly. We're like, oh, I'm just watching Walking Dead or listening to my favorite song or whatever. But probably every piece of art has a message. I mean, I would think anybody who's written anything, a TV show, a film, a commercial, trying to sell you something, written a song, put something into it. It's not just usually an empty vessel without some message in there. And a lot of times, in my industry in particular, it's kind of a hidden message. It's not always like, we're trying to sell you Coke. It's like, this story kind of parallels, minority struggles or things like that. So it can be much more of a subconscious kind of thing going on. But happy to be here. Thanks for asking me.
Thank you. And I'm very excited to introduce the co-founders of the ATX Festival, Emily and Caitlin.
Hello, I'm Caitlin, and we run and started ATX Television Festival. We are going into our 5th year. Prior to that, we were both assistants in Los Angeles and New York and worked in the entertainment industry for about 10 years-ish. This is our first entrepreneurial act, but is definitely including our work in production and TV and industry and fans into now an event and a festival that happens every June in Austin. The festival itself is kind of unique. I like to think it's unique. It obviously, being a television festival, makes it unique to start with. There's not very many of them. but overall, it is a celebration of TV's past, current, and premiere programming, which brings together both industry and fans in almost a 50-50 breakdown to interact with one another, to have, as opposed to maybe some of the bigger festivals that you may have heard of, like South by Southwest or Comic-Con, it is small, intimate, accessible experience. We're working on our social media marketing and digital impact so that we can sort of have more of a value in that way, but we are very passionate about keeping the room small and the experience unique for both the panelists that we have and the audience, to have very educated intellectual conversations about a medium that kind of affects all of us, and really creating, I think from the beginning, creating a community in real life to experience TV. And a medium, television as a medium, is a very community-driven medium. But you watch it alone most of the time in your living room or with a very small group, and we have taken that out of that context and put it in a movie theater or a ballroom or on a panel. So it's growing. It's grown 30% every year until last year, where it jumped 90% in growth. So we're kind of feeling out what that is, and each year we'll hope to grow and evolve and adapt, to not be boring and stagnant. But that's the festival.
And just to add to that, so we are going into our 5th year of the festival, but we also expanded to year-round programming this year. We realized that in order to expand this voice and really expand the brand of who we are and this television community, we didn't just want to be one weekend in June. So we really have started focusing in Austin with working with the Alamo Draft House, a few different locations of theirs, and Google Fiber, which is just launched in Austin, and using their spaces to, this spring we did finale party, so we lost some shows that we cared about a lot. So Parenthood ended, Parks and Rec, Justified. So we did group screenings of each of those shows. You're a Parenthood fan, you can imagine 200 sobbing people together as the show ended. And so those are great start off. And then we also did a half marathon of the new season, the spring, of House of Cards, which was season 3. So we did the 6 episodes where we locked everyone together in the Google Fiber space, and everyone watched the first 6 episodes together, eating barbecue, having some drinks, and then we Google Hangout, which is their version of Skype FaceTime, the creator of the show in to do a live Q&A at the end of it. And then a couple weeks later, he actually came and did an in-person Q&A. And then this spring, we did like a Mr. Robot season finale screening, and then worked with HBO on the Leftover season 2 premiere, and then just did a screening of an episode of Fargo with the creator. So we're really working on making sure that this community that we create, and that's so important to us during the festival, stays together year-round, and really trying to figure out how to utilize social media and all these different platforms to make sure everyone that's not in Austin can still be a part of it. Because while the festival is located here, we're really, 60% of the people that come aren't even in Texas. So figuring out how to keep the community and how to talk to them year-round is really as we're growing.
I don't have to imagine. I was one of the crying fans at the Parenthood finale screening. You can see, based on what all of our panelists have been talking about, we're not taking a negative spin. We're actually staying very positive because we think that media is a good thing and that we can do good things with it. So throughout our conversation, you'll see threads of that positivity. I have the logos for both the ATX Festival and NAC. Our first question, I was actually hoping that Caitlin, Emily, and Chris would talk about the thought that went into the design of these logos.
Do you guys want to go?
You want to start?
So really, when we first started the festival, you should know neither one of us are designers or anywhere close to it. So when we first started the festival, we had a friend of Caitlin's that did just a very basic design, which is just similar to the ATX, and then Television Festival was written out underneath it. It's very simple. We had the star and the A, and we didn't really know what we wanted. Yeah, we put it in a lot of different versions of televisions, T-shirts. It was fine, but we didn't, at that point, starting the festival, didn't understand the importance of branding or marketing or any of that. We just wanted to talk about television with a lot of people. So, but going from we call them each festival a season. So going from season 1 to season 2 of the festival, we were going out to LA to have meetings with studios and networks and realized we really needed to put together a marketing deck for what had happened at the festival. Everything before that had been all projections, but now we actually had people that came and pictures and good things that happened that we need to put together. So we started working with a local design team in Austin to help put together that marketing deck. And in doing that, they really were great about talking to us about our vision for the festival and what was important to us. And the big thing about the festival for us was making sure that we clearly represented past, current, and the future of television. And so we thought that in order to play on that nostalgia, we would take the test pattern, which was such a symbolism of TV from the beginning, and wanted to do something with that but make it feel more modern. And we also loved the star and the A, so we're like, well, at least keep that. And so we started working with these 2 designers in Austin to start that direction. We went through a couple designers. We learned that not only do we not really know how to do it, we don't really know how to talk to them very well. It's very hard to speak to someone where you're not really talking the same language, and we learned that I mean, even just in discovering who we were and what our brand was, it's really hard to not only make it so everyone can see it, but also put it together.
Because also I think when you work with a designer, they're an artist as well, so they've got their own opinion, but it's your company and your brand, and so you've got to figure out a way to talk to an artist that's not just going to cut and paste something that you're telling them to do, because you want them to bring their artistic vision to it, but you also want them to listen to you because you know your company better than most. So we worked with these guys for a while, and we got to the test pattern, we got kind of far, and then we just realized we'd hit a wall. We both decided to sort of stop working on it together, and the person, through a friend that we had brought in to be our sort of liaison, she spoke their language in a way that she translated for us. So for a while there, she worked with them and us, and whenever we parted ways, she took it from there because she really understood what we were doing. And although it was very interesting, we had this whole test pattern concept of what a test pattern meant to us. And after the design was made and we had all signed off on it, we were in a conversation about the meaning behind it, and she had a completely different meaning that she tried to correct us on.
Which is okay.
It is.
It's okay for it to mean a little bit something different to everyone, but not when you're arguing about it and it's stifling you.
So she helped us finish it into season 2. I think an interesting thing that happened, though, in that being artists and everybody feels ownership over it, the short version of, we were attempted to, by both of them, we were sued. The first one was we were able to come to terms before it actually we were threatened to be sued. There were a lot of emotions. It was all emotional. The second one, we were actually sued and won. But I think in terms of creating your own brand, really what we learned from that lesson, because we were year 1 into 2, despite who they are, they could be your mom. If you're working with them, there needs to be an agreement. It needs to say who owns it. It needs to say who's in charge. It needs to exchange. I mean, we had what we thought were agreements that weren't strong enough in terms of ownership and decision. It all worked out fine, but it really was a lesson that we thanked our stars that it was happening between the early genesis of our company, because we also knew we could change our logo at year 1 to 2 if we needed to. We really didn't want to. We loved it. But in terms of coming to it, it's a lot of voices. It's a lot of decisions. But like Emily said, I think the biggest thing that is still part of our brand is it's a modern version of the test pattern. And so it is past TV and future TV was the meaning behind it.
Excellent.
Yeah, we actually had a pretty similar experience in a lot of ways. I mean, communication is really key with developing a logo and developing a brand identity, and more importantly, consistency of brand identity is precedence, because your brand is going to be over across so many different mediums, from paper, print, digital. It needs to be in a specific format in a way that's really transferable. And so in order to draw the initial form of the NAC logo, I mean, we probably probably went through hundreds of different mocks and designs just with pen and paper. And we worked with an individual designer. It's actually a local designer named Ricky Fullen in San Marcos. And right on that note, it's important to work out, those independent contractor agreements and stuff like that. But once that intellectual property is assigned, I mean, really, there is an artistic element to this. There's things that we wanted, from a business standpoint, to be in our logo, but we kind of got a little pushback from the artistic side. But that's kind of why you bring those people on and to tell you that. For us, there's two. There's a primary and secondary. The secondary is actually our logo for our app icon. So for us, it was like how we were this was going to be the use of the logo. And so we wanted to develop a form that was kind of like Pinterest. You'll see the big P for Pinterest, and then you'll see the actual Pinterest word. It's kind of transferable on both mediums, and we wanted something that really worked and played off that. And so that's kind of how we developed the form. But as we went into color, I mean, that was a huge realization of contrast. And so when you're placing this logo on a white background, for instance, it has to contrast on whatever medium you're looking at. Otherwise, it's really hard to read. If it's hard to read, it's going to be hard to get brand identity established. So we went through a bunch of different colors. And colors actually come down to really what you want your brand to represent. If you can go back up to the first slide. So these are basically our principles and values, and we knew that the color choice and form of our logo wanted to be representative of that, and so that was kind of the influence that we went into going color. So for instance, blues are going to build much more trust with your audience, whereas reds and yellows might make you a little bit more anxious. That's exactly why McDonald's has reds and yellows inside their store, so you can kind of increase the number of the rate that people are coming in and going, because they don't want you to get too comfortable there. Well, for us, it was like we want to translate trust. We also get paid cash, so there's this green cash money element as well, so we had to strike a place between those two. And then so we developed a style guide that basically broke down what we wanted to translate as a brand and to get our style down. And then we give this out to our designers, because if you go down to slide 3, it tells you not only how to use the logo, if you go down one more slide, it also tells you how not to use the logo, so that this is all placed. And so our designer works at Microsoft and Xbox One, and he actually helped put us this thing together. So this is exactly what your large enterprise clients and customers, large enterprise organizations are going to be doing to create solidified brand identity. Because when you're talking about a display model in a retail store to what it's going to look like on a pay-per-click ad that you might click on to what a social media post, there has to be consistency. So they develop style guides like that to drive that consistency. So that's how we developed our logo.
Can I ask them a question? I have a question on logos. Anybody who can answer. Why, I've always wondered, when someone has a well-established logo, sometimes they change up, quote Google, why would you change your logo that everybody knows and has known for a long time? Do you have any insight into that?
Well, the two big ones were the Facebook and the Google, for you guys that aren't really familiar with that. And they had just recently rebranded for the letters, different shapes, and actual spacing. What that's primarily driven through is mobile adoption when those brands were created. And that was another thing you have to think about with our logo, is how is this going to be presented on a mobile device? And there's limited pixels per square inch on an actual screen. And so when you look at spacing between characters and readability, especially as it scales down on a mobile screen, they had to go with something with a little bit more, and a form that was more readable and legible for what they were going to do, because they're tech companies. And that was been a primary driver, is the mobile adoption.
Excellent. So what I'm taking away from this, it's basically the face of your company. So it gets pretty important. Okay, I will limit my conversation here. I have a question for Elliot. He mentioned Travel Tuva to you earlier. In what ways are the marketing images that you create responsible to the people that they represent, particularly when you are marketing culture for tourism?
Well, if you guys don't mind, I'm going to have to take you to school a little bit. It's going to be a lot of context. How many of you are familiar with Tuva before today? Had ever heard of Tuva as a geographic space? Yeah. So, I mean, it's a tiny republic located in the geographic center of Asia. It's the southernmost republic in Siberia and one of the southernmost republics in all of Russia. It's about the size of North Dakota in area. Terrain-wise, you could imagine it as a kind of bowl. There's mountains surrounding the republic with rolling valleys in the middle. The people who live there are primarily pastoralists. They herd sheep, cows, yaks, horse, Bactrian camel, and reindeer. And during the days of the Soviet Union, Tuva was an autonomous administrative oblast of the Soviet Union, which meant that it had its own local government, but that government was connected to the administrative Soviet bureaucratic apparatus in Moscow. And during the days of the Soviet Union, as you guys probably all know, the Soviets operated on a command economy, meaning they weren't a capitalist economy. So whatever monies were made within the Soviet Union were then sent to the centralized bureaucratic apparatus in Moscow and redistributed around the country based on this kind of command economy strategy, rather than allowing market forces to dictate where money flows ended up, right? So in the days of the Soviet Union, Tuva provided the Soviet state with a large percentage of its meat and many other agricultural products, and was recompensated with economic flows, both in terms of products and money. Well, when the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, for about 3 years, people in Tuva had no support at all because the Soviet state had collapsed, but no market demand had really begun pulling products from Tuva. So Tuvans had no money, and there was no products on their shelves at all. A lot of my Tuvan friends tell me that the Soviet collapse left everyone totally confused. One day they're Soviets headed toward this bright future that the ideology of the Soviet Union was promising them. They'd all given up local regional identities. Much of the cultural practices of the Tuvans that had been handed down for generations, their music, their dress, their language was increasingly forbidden in the Soviet state, and Tuvans were asked to adopt Russian-style culture. They were kind of humiliated in terms of what their culture meant relative to Russian culture. So when the Soviet Union collapsed, all of a sudden they're just cut free economically, socially, and culturally, and these people feel like they had no direction and were kind of cast adrift. So many people in Tuva went out into the taiga forests and the hills and just continued pastoralist lifeways and hunting to survive. And a few Tuvans realized that their music, their ability to perform what we call in America throat singing, it's this ability for a single singer to perform multiple notes simultaneously from a single voice, endemic to Tuva. They realized that this was something very special and that they could take it to the world, and maybe that would be a way for them to generate an economy for themselves. So some of these early throat singers went to America and got a bunch of spots on late night television shows, Jay Leno. They even showed up on the ill-fated Chevy Chase show and performed throat singing wearing what we might perceive as traditional Tuvan clothing, singing throat singing songs. And at that time, a lot of interest in throat singing was generated, and there were a small contingent of American musicians who wanted to go to Tuva to learn about this music. So in a way, Tuvans were generating interest in their republic and generating an economy for themselves when they had no other option by playing on nostalgia in a way. They were kind of increasing the degree to which foreigners who knew nothing about Tuva would imagine Tuva as this like long-lost, almost Tibetan-style land that time forgot, where people are living life ways of the pastoralists of the Silk Road or whatever it is, untouched by contemporary technology and the global madness that we all continue to throw ourselves into with our mobile devices and the inexorable force of market demands we place on ourselves in this global economy of which we're all a part. So, Tuvans would sit on stage and do their throat singing and talk about how wonderful it is to herd their sheep and how slow life seems to pass when you're sitting by a mountain stream or whatever it is. And certainly this drew a lot of people out to Tuva in the early days, and that was successful in some ways. But unfortunately, creating Tuva as this again, fictitious, highly romantic land that time forgot, disadvantages the Tuvan population in many aspects. Tuvans are plugged into the global economy. For most Tuvans, their life is highly urban. About 200,000 of the 300,000 people that live in Tuva today live in the capital city of Tuva, Kazil. They live in apartments that are hand-me-downs from the Soviet era, you know, the nice concrete blocks that everybody loves so much. And you know, they all have cell phones. They're all trying to get out in the world and be part of the global economy. But the only notable, I guess, cultural success that Tuva has enjoyed, and what people in the world know them for, is, again, this kind of pastoral image. And that pastoral image, in a way, allows people who are not from Tuva to kind of turn a blind eye to a lot of the problems Tuvans face. I mean, if there are places in the world where large portions of the population are subject to political despotism or massive natural disasters or something, Tuvans seem to have it pretty well off. Like, maybe they're nomadic pastoralists, maybe they're not materially very wealthy, but hey, they're not being pillaged by a neighboring tribe or ravaged by disease. But when you go to Tuva and spend a lot of time there, like I myself have, you get into the culture of the people. And from my perspective as an American, they live in conditions fairly similar to a lot of Native American reservations in the United States. They're kind of pushed out to the margins, politically uninvolved in Russia, and you know, they don't really benefit from, in a large sense, from having people come to Tuva for that romantic image. You know, very few people are going to buy into that kind of marketing and spend a lot of money in a place like Tuva. So, you know, you've got life expectancy for men in the Republic is about 50. Alcoholism's through the roof. Unemployment's 80%. You've got a lot of real social problems that primarily come out of the fact that the contemporary Russian government maintains complete control of all mineral rights, subsurface mineral rights, in all of the Russian Federation. So in Texas, if you own a plot of land and your ancestors were smart, whoever gave it to you, and got the mineral rights, you can sell those or lease those rights out to extraction companies. In Russia, this is not the case. Tuvans sit on some of Russia's most concentrated coal reserves, zinc reserves, gold reserves, but they themselves can't sell any of the subsurface minerals. And the Russian government, who owns the stuff, they know that Mongol labor across the border in Mongolia is far cheaper than paying Tuvans to do the work with the ruble, because the Mongol currency is devalued relative to the ruble. So Tuvans don't really get work out of it either. Some Tuvans work in the mineral extraction, but it's not a good industry for them for those reasons. So developing Travel Tuva was a way to provide, we hope, meaningful employment and to generate an economy that's a little bit more regular and predictable for Tuvans. But we didn't want to try to attract people to Tuva using this, again, highly romanticized imagery. So if you'll go back to the homepage again, Elizabeth, and just look at the carousel of images that we use. Sure, this is like the typical like natural tourist's dream, right? You go somewhere, you hike in the beautiful mountains, you might go to like some pastoral Tuvan encampment, but we didn't. If you can pause it on that photo by just clicking one of those little buttons in the bottom corner of the carousel, I guess it's the third button. If you look at this image in particular, this is during a horse race, which Tuvans are very well known for. They're very into horses, very serious horsemen. Seriously, they're incredible. People start racing horses at 3 years old over like 40-kilometer stretches. I mean, it's amazing. We didn't do what a lot of marketers will do when trying to market tourism. A lot of tourists will want to go to a place in the world that seems untouched, right? You want to go to Big Bend because there's no development, or you want to go to, you know, whatever national park. You want to go to Alaska because you're trying to get away from things and you want to go relax. If you look at an image like this, which seems to be pitching the beautiful natural environment that you see in the background, if you scroll the photo down just slightly, you can see the kind of curves of this beautiful landscape. We didn't edit out the power lines. We didn't edit out the cars. And we didn't edit out the fact that there are a lot of people wearing baseball caps. So the way Tuvans used to market themselves was, again, to focus purely on this romantic image without allowing any perceived like Western style clothing or technology to penetrate into that landscape. But we're trying to show that, no, these people are included in the world. And they are subject to the whimsical forces of the market. And we're not trying to sell you something that doesn't exist out there. We want you to be interested in the lives of Tuvans, because if you get an interest in the lives of Tuvans, then maybe a lot of the struggles that they face can be alleviated, if not through the forces of tourism and just the open market. Maybe there's a way that tourists who go there can start to generate a genuine interest in the people and take up some of the issues they face. Not to belittle Tuvans and say that they can't get themselves out of their own problems, but it's always important in this world to have allies. So that's part of what the Travel Tuva project is about. The other way I think that we're responsible to the people that we market is we're also responsible, I believe, to the people that we market to. So we're trying to get Americans, Europeans, Canadians, people from outside of Russia to go to Tuva. But if you look at the way Russia is depicted in contemporary news media, all you see are the looming, outdated, outmoded ghosts of a Cold War long forgotten by my generation. The Cold War is over, but we still shiver its blizzards, right? And I don't think it's healthy to continue to portray Russia to the world as this looming specter behind an iron curtain that's homogenized, that is this land of quasi-evil giants, right? Alcoholics who somehow wield nuclear weapons. Russia is this incredible spread of 209 languages, an incredible diversity of culture. If you dig into the Travel Tuva website and see more imagery of Central Asian pastoral life, or you watch some of the videos we produced that include the incredible music, throat singing that Tuvans are known for, none of that recalls the images of Khrushchev's Russia, right? None of this looks like Putin. And that's the point we're trying to make. So I think in a lot of ways, the imagery that we use, though this is a private business that is trying to make money for itself and its partners, it's also politically involved, both for the consumers of the media and for the people that this media represents.
So when you're developing the marketing materials for the site and given the context and what's at stakes for the Tuvans, did you feel a sense of responsibility like with this entire project?
Most certainly, because I went to Tuva foremost as a social anthropologist, so I wasn't there as an entrepreneur in the beginning. I was there to understand Tuvan life and to look at Tuvan music and to figure out the situation these people find themselves in. And when you go there to do that, you end up learning a whole lot about people without any outside, not any outside motivation. I mean, I was there to get an education, and education in our culture is supposed to, anyway, give you access to careers, social prestige, etc. So there's an exchange implicit. But when I went there because I really loved the music, and I grew to really love the people and make great, deep, lasting, lifelong friendships with many musicians and people of the everyday in Tuva who I continue to proudly call my friends. So yeah, putting this together, there is a business interest, and I'm responsible to that in as much as, sure, it makes me some money and it helps them. But all of the political issues that I traced out earlier, I feel a responsibility for, not just because of my relationships with Tuvans, but also because I'm a participant in this broader world. And it's a world that in the 20th century got rocked by a lot of really crazy occurrences that continue, whose rhetorics continue to fill our ears and our faces and our minds. And as that first quote points out, you watch something enough, it affects the way you think. It affects the way you see the world. And when people are saying things like, oh, Putin's expanding his borders just like the Soviet, it's like he's trying to build up the Soviet Union again, or he's expanding his territory into Crimea like he's Hitler invading Czechoslovakia. Well, no, that's not what's going on at all. Russia is not a threat in that sense. And I hate to get too political, but this is the responsibility I feel, is to try to undercut a lot of what I think are intentionally sensationalizing rhetorics that go on in media in the world today, in news media in particular. So I feel that responsibility as well.
Thank you. This panel is running itself, but I do have more questions. You heard Elliot mention that he has a responsibility to these people whose culture he's advertising, but he also has a responsibility to the people he's advertising to. So I was hoping that Chris could maybe jump in and talk a little bit about how to address a specific audience. Yeah.
Yeah, and those are great points, and I think that is it is really you do have to be conscious of what you're really going for, and I think that's one of the biggest things that a lot of marketers, advertisers, and companies struggle with is understanding their customer and what they're trying to reach out to. And the beauty of social media is the access of what's going on into what we call the back end, or what's kind of happening behind the scenes. What's kind of happened is these accounts have allowed you to create a social profile that's then indexed and accessible at what we call at scale. So they have like a lot of people's accounts on a nice big index, and they can access all this information. Well, what they're able to do is then categorize this information, but through not only basic demographics like sex, age, and location, but also what's called interests and behaviors. So what type of pages have you liked? What type of content do you enjoy? What types of TV shows do you watch? What types of brands do you buy and clothes do you wear? And then they basically build this social profile about you, and then that's basically used on their actual advertisements and targeting platforms. So whenever you actually go and create an advertisement, we're actually at the height of this right now in a way that's basically unprecedented, because I think Facebook grew 13% in the last year of how many people actually use it. So more and more people are adding to this big list. What it allows marketers then to do is drill down into who their audience is, which is really the first step in developing an advertisement or marketing campaign. So you have to define, like, what is your sex, what is your gender. Obviously, an ad that's created for a female is going to look much different for a male, but if you want to attract both, that's going to look different as well. Down to region and location. Like Taco Bell did some stuff with Taco Bell's breakfast menu, but they only released it in the southern regions of the U.S. because guess what? We like breakfast tacos. So they're what a southern food or a southern advertisement is going to look a lot different than what you may show on the East Coast. So that's going to also impact how you craft this advertisement. And then now that we're able to go even down even to interests and behaviors, we may develop an advertisement that looks different for a certain type of TV show watcher. So maybe they talked about parenthood and how everyone was much more sentimental, and versus like maybe the ending of Game of Thrones, which is a little bit more exciting.
It's still exciting, which is sad.
Right. So those look different, and so when marketers develop this, they take their audience into consideration as to how they craft these messages, and that impacts what types of visuals they're going to use, if they're going to use visuals or not, how long that's going to be. Like one of the things we've seen is the younger you go in demographic and age, the shorter the video has to be. I mean, we're seeing videos, the norms was 15 seconds, now it's 8 seconds for 13 and 21-year-olds. So these attention spans are getting smaller. Also, you may see, like, if you're going after an older demographic, text works really well still, and they still like to read in-depth text and blogs, whereas maybe millennials are much more visual, and so visual ads respond much better. In addition to crafting these messages, what we're really seeing is what's called social listening. So what they'll do is they'll create multiple messages that are essentially the same, except they'll adjust the targets, interests, behaviors, and demographics behind them, and then they'll see, okay, well, which advertisements perform the best? So which ones reach the most people, and which ones drove the most sales for my company? So now they're able to discern, okay, well, this advertisement in the southern regions between 18 and 24-year-olds outperformed every other advertisement. My customer must be 18 and 24-year-olds in the southern regions to sell my product. So it's happening vice versa. So not only is it important to understand your audience when you're crafting your messages, but as they look at the performance of their advertisements, it's actually able to provide insights into who they're advertising to, which has been the hardest part about marketing, is because for years it's been throw money into a black hole, and then we'll throw a TV ad and we'll see how much it's gonna, how much sales will drive, and they're not really sure who's driving the sales, or they'll do focus groups or consumer groups to get opinions and answers about certain things. Now those are almost irrelevant to what's called QA testing on social media ads.
Can I jump in real fast?
Yes.
I just want to say, so we deal with a large number of sponsors. It's 50% of how we put on the festival, and in dealing with them and their campaigns, one of the things that's really important to us in dealing with sponsors is making sure that, I like the term that you used, native marketing, it's a little different, but that it's an actual experience. It's not, what I always say, people don't want to be talked at, they want to be talked to. So they want it to be a discussion and a conversation as opposed to just a big logo on a screen, because that's not really going to market your product or get people excited about it. It's really the actual interaction with it. So we work really hard with our sponsors to make sure it makes sense for the festival and that they're getting a good experience. But the thing that we find really interesting in meeting with the studios and networks when we're actually programming the festival and asking, what is it that you want? We keep, as Kate said, we keep our rooms small so that people are getting a really intimate experience and really being able to walk away having experience something special. But of course, these studios and networks, they want ratings. So what they're looking at is, what's the social media impression? And it's interesting that they can't really figure out how to define even what that is. They just want a large number. They just want to know this many people are using my hashtag, this many people are saying the name of my product, without really being able to, because even Twitter followers, I mean, when we first started the festival, we actually funded it off of Kickstarter. And so we, did the whole Kickstarter campaign and had a number of people in the television industry that were going to social media it out. And so we're like, oh, they have all of these followers. So with all of these, millions of followers. So if all of their followers gave $1, we're going to be billionaires. And of course, I mean, the percentage of their social media followers that actually responded and engaged. One of our friends has been on the Vampire Diaries before and has a following because of that. And so we're like, oh, she's going to have all these Vampire Diaries fans. She would tweet something out about the festival, and all they wanted to talk about was the Vampire Diaries. Like, they didn't care about the message that she was trying to give. But it's interesting because these companies are still looking at, well, she tweeted it out. She has 10 million followers, so 10 million people saw it, but they're not actually looking at whether that engagement counts for anything. And it's like, we're kind of baffled by it, but we're like, well, if you just want numbers, we'll just get you numbers, but I don't know what that's actually doing at the end of the day.
Because the part of it that we've over 4 years learned is that the smaller room, we've often said, like, 5,000 people or 500 people, it's not an audience for your show. Like, it's not going to save your show or your brand or whatever, whether it's in a Comic-Con size 5,000 person conference room. But the quality of the eyeball actually matters more than the quantity. If they actually engage with it, they actually do a hands-on experience, they're going to take that experience and they are going to talk about it, and they are going to get their friend to come, which is exactly how we've marketed the festival. We've never had an advertisement. We've never paid for anything. We obviously have a website. We do social media. But the first year, 700 people came. The next year, they came back with a friend or a family member, and then those people did, because we've never actually been able to figure out, very open to it, but figuring out what an ad for the festival would look like, because all it would look like is celebrities. Well, the festival itself is about actually meeting other fans of your favorite shows and talking about TV. It's not about getting a new profile picture. And if you put any of that into some sort of straight ad, it's not going to translate. It's not going to get the quality of the audience that we want, that actually uses, Shiner and Bullet and Kind Bars and the things that have nothing to do with television, but they spend a weekend, which we call camp, eating Kind Bars and drinking Shiner beer, and they remember it a week later when they're at home and they're sad that they're not at camp anymore. They go and buy a beer. Like, it is a much more quality of eyeball or engagement than the quantity of it, which is frustrating as can be when you're in a meeting with Comedy Central and they're like, well, what's your impression? Like, I don't know, we've got like 10,000 followers, but like,
millions of people saw
Vampire Diaries people come. I don't know how that changes it. But we wholeheartedly believe very passionately that that's a better engagement. It's overall.
Yeah, that's something I'm encountering more and more in the acting field, is like I hear stories a lot of times now. It's not just about who's the best actor. They're taking things into account, like how many Twitter followers that guy have, what's his IMDb star rating, and things like that.
Which means nothing.
Right, it literally means nothing. I have friends on Facebook who, constantly or every day are like, hey man, please go like my IMDb page so my star rating will go up. And so, all that means is those are the most obnoxious people who bang the most and go like my page.
That's what happens with Kickstarter too.
Yeah.
It's like, give a dollar, shut up.
And so, I totally agree in that, we're in this weird age where it's like, they don't know how to quantify it other than numbers of how many followers. And half the time also half followers like bots and spam accounts that follow you to try and spam you with come buy sunglasses from my page or whatever, Yeah.
Okay. I, in turn, have a question for you, if that's okay, if we're not running.
Is it related? I have a related question as well.
Well,
go ahead.
This slightly turns back the page.
Please, yes.
But it's a question about responsibility. So you've talked about the decreasing length of videos that are circulated, particularly as we are trying to market to younger and younger age demographics. If people are spending more and more time on the internet, on their devices, watching videos that encourage them to have shorter and shorter attention spans, it follows that they're not going to be able to develop the kind of like intellectual integrity necessary to be very successful people in the world. I mean, you've got to have a lot of focus. You've got to have a lot of ability to place your abilities into your studies, etc. Do you think it's responsible to encourage that kind of behavior?
Well, I think it comes down to how that information is consumed and presented. I mean, I think you could still be as successful if you maybe changed the way that information was being presented. So maybe instead of watching a 2-hour lecture, they broke the lecture into two 10-second segment sound bites, and you still get the information you need. You just consume it differently. Obviously, that's a drastic example. But I also think it's also primarily driven with the amount of information that's being created. I don't necessarily think people are getting or have shorter attention spans as much as they have less time to consume information. Because like if you look at the number of messages that are being created, it's like this curve that's going like this. And if you look at the number of messages one person can actually physically consume within a day, there's only so many hours a day you're on social media. That's pretty much constant and fixed. Although the number of messages is getting increased and increased, so people are getting like crammed with more messages and having to consume a lot more. So I think that's driving that attention span. But I think there are ramifications like that as well that do play into that. And I think that it is something, and I think it's partly one of the reasons why we have things like this and organizations like Media Literacy Week that are driving education component to that, so people are aware that this is happening and that they do need to spend time in studies like that. But I also wanted to address some of these issues and questions over here to this quantification of like this impression. That's one of the biggest challenges of social media advertisers that we've had, is not every what's called impression or eyeball is created equal. You may have someone who's sharing a certain message out to a fan base, but they may like only a certain types of messages, so they're really only responding to certain types of thing. So what we say in social media is that person only has influence on certain topics and subjects. So what we actually have done to actually address that problem, it's funny that we bring this up, but without going on too much of a rant here, we actually could develop a social media proprietary algorithm that allows us to rate influence on the platform. So one of the things that we're looking at is pound for pound, how influential are you? Yes, you may have a small following, but of that following, who's really listening to what you're saying? So what we do is we look at the number of likes and comments that you'll have, which are called engagement metrics that are driven by your following or your audience. We'll look at the number of posts that you've made over time, and then we'll say how many likes and comments have you gotten over how many posts relative to the number of followers that you have. And that actually gives us a social score, and then we create a social score to say, okay, this person is influential with these types of top interests and behaviors and subjects. And then what actually that's allowed us to do is what we've seen since 2013 is the influencer marketing has been around. People have been paying celebrities and these big social media and YouTube stars to share these messages, but it's always been for people that have more than 10,000 followers usually. And so we actually created this idea of what's called a micro influencer, or just people like